So I'm delighted to have as my guest today Rob Bender, who is an executive vice president and the chief lending officer of the First National Bank of Elmer in South Jersey, to talk about one of the biggest challenges that most community bankers have been dealing with for the better part of 2 decades, and that's the talent gap. And I want to say at the outset that the reason that I met Rob in the first place was an article that he had published in the RMA Journal right before the pandemic in March with his CEO, Brian Jones, which I thought was a great article about the talent gap. So Rob, thank you for writing that.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am curious because I know you've been active in RMA, and I am a huge fan of RMA. In the interest of full disclosure, I am also a pensioner of RMA, but you've been active in RMA for a number of years. Maybe tell people briefly what you've done in your RMA career.
Yeah, I think RMA has been a great resource for me. I've been on the local chapter board, an active member. I'm actually on the Chapter Development Council as well, and have been active in roundtables and things. I think it's a great resource for us as bankers. So I've gotten a lot out of it, and I'm very proud of my involvement.
Well, you should be, because it is an organization that has focused for its entire history on developing talent that will take the next generation of banks and bankers forward. So I really applaud your involvement in it. And I do want to talk about the First National Bank of Elmer in the context of this challenge. Maybe you could just give us a thumbnail of the bank and sort of the lead-in into the question, which is your experience in recruiting talent out of universities.
Well, I think that our bank's been around since 1903, so we're kind of a small community bank in southern New Jersey, but we're kind of like the bank with the big bite. We reach from Burlington County down to Cape May, and we do a fair amount of lending. We lead with lending. We've built the bank with a soft approach model, where a lot of what we do is face-to-face. So obviously through the pandemic, it was a little bit difficult. We had to kind of reroute our efforts in how we do business. Since we were so reliant on face-to-face, we certainly got familiar with Zoom and Teams and back to phone calls. We've adapted like everybody else has. But we as a small bank don't have a formal training program per se. So we do rely on mentorship programs and internships, and our soft approach also goes into our hiring practices as well. So when we're looking at young talent, young professionals, we do utilize our resources as small community bankers to attract talent. So we're not doing anything, different other than, we're selling ourselves and selling the bank.
So one of the things that is interesting about your situation is you're very close to Rowan University, which for those who are listening may not realize it's a fairly large state institution in New Jersey. I believe it's a state institution.
It's a university, Rowan
University. And it has a large business program. And your CEO, Brian Jones, has been active in alumni affairs. So there's a connection there to the university, which may have been part of the reason you started looking toward Rowan as a potential source of interns. That's my assumption. Was Rowan interested in supporting that effort?
Yeah, I think we're involved with a lot of different affiliations with universities, professional organizations, and third-party organizations. It certainly helped that Brian was an alumni and also sits on the Rohr School of Business Foundation Board. So we've utilized the business school there for internships and mentorship programs. We've actually been fortunate to have hired and still retain several alumni from Rowan. One of the others that is also prevalent down this area is Stockton University. So we have a handful of folks from there as well. But I think the overall program with working with universities, you know, speaking back to RMA, you know, it also ties into student membership, student involvement, university curriculum, that kind of thing. So we're kind of involved across the spectrum, but utilization of mentorship and internship programs just allows us to bring in young talent, explain to them, you know, what it is we do. And it also almost allows us to kind of test ride potential employees. You know, we're able to kind of bring them in and expose them to quite a bit. You know, in our bank, when we bring these young folks in, you know, we're exposing them to everybody from the tellers all the way up to the president and CEO. You know, most actually sit in the president and CEO's office and have a conversation of, you know, what's your understanding of banking? You know, what do you want to, you know, what are your future aspirations of when you get out of college? You know, we're generally speaking to students that are juniors and seniors, and really explaining to them, you know, what it is we do. If you talk to a lot of college students, one of the last things they say is, I want to be a community banker. so, you know, when you actually sit down with them and explain, you know, okay, well, you can, you know, be a community banker, and this is what it is. Because most students think of banking as, you know, banking and finance as financial planners or Wall Street investment bankers. You know, and we all know that that's not what community bankers do. So, you know, if I were to sit with a finance major that might have an interest in lending, I can explain to them a complete career path, going from a junior analyst to an analyst to a portfolio manager to into the credit side of the business, or into the lending side of the business. You could certainly parlay that into compliance, risk management. Same thing on the retail side with deposit operations, and you know you have actually increased compliance on that side. But you know, one of the largest pieces of our business that's evolved, you know, as we all know, is risk management. So you know, with that, you can partner that with obtaining higher credentials, but it's certainly a different landscape than we have. But as a small bank, smaller bank, we certainly leverage ourselves, you know, as people first. So that's one of the ways that we do that.
Let me ask a question about what you're actually looking for when you're sitting down with a business student from one of the local colleges. Years ago, one of the largest management training programs in the country, may still be, was looking in very clear terms for people who had been leaders in the university. So they were looking for athletes, or they were looking for people that were active in fraternities or sororities or social organizations on campus. Do you have a profile that you're looking for?
I wouldn't say a profile. You know, obviously we look for leadership qualities, and you know, we're very, very heavily involved in community service and giving back. It's kind of as a community bank, that's what we do. But you know, most importantly, you know, me personally, I look for personality and the ability to kind of fit into our culture. We spend a lot of time building our culture. And, you know, so those are probably the main things that we look for. But again, it's depending on the job, the individual, you know, it's evolving. I don't think that there's a one size fits all.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But it is interesting that a lot of what you're looking for, I think, are the hallmarks of good bankers in terms of their communication skills, their social skills, their ability to interact. The assumption being, in the lending arena, which you oversee, you can teach people how to analyze cash flow, or you can teach people the principles of loan structuring. It's not like they learn those things or have that as background coming in to your organization. So talk to me a little bit about how you piece together a program. You've highlighted the fact there's a lot of rotation, which is a plus. You get to see people in different spots, but they also get to see different spots. But what would you do in terms of training on the commercial side? What kinds of resources would you take advantage of?
Well, I think it's important initially to expose anyone to, you know, all the different areas of the bank. But specific to interns, you know, I think really having a complete understanding of banking becomes more helpful as you develop your career. So, we utilize a lot of internal, processes that allows them exposure to other areas of the bank. But as far as training goes, I'd indicated prior that, we don't have a formal training program or department. So we do utilize a lot of third parties. We're members of the ICBA, which is a great resource for us. Mainly on the compliance side, we're using them for a lot of our BSA and compliance training. But we also are members of ACBB and their division called the Compliance Center, which we utilize their expertise as well. And then a lot of our third parties, through internal audit or compliance, we're using those folks, and they're here on site or now remote. But we use them as we can, and we expose our young hires to them. So they have a lot at their fingertips. If they have a question, we want to make sure they have access to the answers to it. As far as the lending function goes, we do utilize RMA quite a bit for their credit training. So that enables us to really create our own training. We can take everything from a basic credit analysis into specific healthcare lending. So it gives us the gamut of a full array of lending training that we can utilize. But most of what we found is most helpful is really it's the hands-on. It's you got to put the time in. You have to time will teach you the business. You've got people in the credit department. We've got a good group of lenders that we're very culture. It gets back to culture too, because you have to have a culture of continuing education. So that becomes and remains important in everything we do. So we do try to expose them to all areas of the bank and all areas also outside of the bank.
I think that's a really smart way to approach it. And one of the ways that some people conceptualize this is about 70% of what somebody's going to learn is on the job. 20% is probably going to come from the coaching. And I think in a community bank environment, getting coached by the CEO or the chief lending officer is something that is an advantage when you're trying to position yourself versus other organizations. So there's no question about the value there. And maybe 10% is training. And there are more options today, which I try to remind people. There are different ways you can go about getting the training from different resources, including some of the ones we talked about, state bankers associations, vendors who will often assist in a lot of this. I am curious about what you now see. I'm not going to say we're post-pandemic, but we're 19 months into the pandemic. Is there anything that's different today, as you look at this whole issue of bringing in interns to the organization in terms of how you're going to go going forward?
Well, I think we would all agree that we are certainly working probably a little smarter and a little more efficient with the way we're working. As I mentioned, we're a smaller community bank, so we from an IT standpoint evolved tremendously through this process. With having access to laptops, remote capability. We're light years ahead of where we were prior to the pandemic. But I think that as it relates to professionals and interns, what they expect is different. They not only expect a reasonable compensation package, but they want to know if they have a career path. They want a good benefits package. They want community involvement. They want to see volunteer initiatives. So it's a little different. When we're interviewing today, years ago, you probably wouldn't have imposed the question, what's your working remote policy?
That's a real question today. You better know how to answer it.
And it's one of the probably the top 3 or top 5 questions. So that's something, it's real, and I don't think it's going anywhere. But overall, I think, certainly we're definitely, much more efficient than we were, as far as, being able to get the job done, probably a little smarter, and with probably, I think one of the big things that came out of the pandemic was the work-life balance. I think everybody's, become more conscious of that. So I think that's the important thing that came out of this.
So one of the issues that sometimes comes up in my conversations with people is, so we put a lot of energy and we invest time and money in training these young folks, knowing full well that they might leave us. So are there any specific things that you have tried to do or you would recommend community bankers do to retain the talent that they're bringing in?
I don't think that just relates to young professionals or interns or newer employees. I think that is pertinent to all employees. We all know in banking, we all try to steal each other's business. We're stealing each other's employees. Not steal, but I think that the retention piece of what we do is more important than ever, especially if you're bringing in young talent and putting all the training in and getting them up to speed. There's always going to be an employer out there with a better compensation package per se, because all banks have different goals and there are, depending on the size of your organization, the types of lending you're doing, there's a lot of different things that factor into that. But I think that culture, again, it's a common theme. Culture is extremely important. Obviously, the compensation package has to be there, but I think the career path, and continuing education will continue to be most important when you're, retaining talent.
I think that's a really important comment. Yeah, I think that's a really important comment because what I've seen, and you actually cited in your article, there's a lot of research that would suggest that, yeah, you got to have the right compensation package, but it's really the career progression and how you see their role going forward that really is important. So as people think about their plans for 2022 and think about their budgets for things like training, but experiential kind of things, they ought to be thinking not just about this year, but look down the road with your people's career aspirations in mind and think a little longer term. So Rob, this has been great. I do appreciate you spending the time here with us. I know that people will benefit from your experience, and I hope a couple of them check out your article. And if they have further questions, they try to reach out to you. But thanks again for joining me on this NedTalks.
Great. Thank you, Ned. Appreciate it.